Favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Kia ora, tēnā kōrua, Hiramini lawa ko Luann. Item 15, just to give you a time check to the committee, just to let you know, it'll be about 12:30, 1:45 that I'll be breaking for lunch, and then we'll finish our work and finish hopefully about 5. So we'll go to item 15, Te Kete Rukuruku. That's a site selection, Māori naming of regional parks. We've got Dawn and Justine. Dawn will be speaking to the item, our staff, and I will move and Kathy will second. And I will put on the table just to let everybody know that there are some changes. They are in red, as you can see. Before I ask Dawn to talk to the item, these changes happened late last night. I was in communication with Dawn around the changes here, and she will speak to it further. But what we've done is we have removed Duda Regional Park in regards to invite mana whenua to write a Māori name, and also added in C, support further discussions with the Scandret and Duda families and mana whenua with a view to including Scandret Regional Park and the Duda Regional Park for dual naming in a subsequent tranche. So look, we've got that, and I'm going to ask now, Dawn, if you could speak to the item. Thank you so much. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair Filipaina, and kia ora koutou katoa. Ko Dawn Bardsley Tukuingoa. I'm the naming lead for Te Kere Rukuruku and the author of the report. I'm joined here today by my colleagues Anahira Higgins, Justine Havs and Scott De Silva, who are also available to answer questions in their particular areas of expertise should they come up. I have prepared a short presentation that I can run through with you today, so I'll share my screen with you now. Hopefully that will work beautifully.
Still waiting, Dawn.
Yep, I'm just
okay.
Finding the right. There we go. This should. Okay. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now.
Kapai.
Hi. Great. Right. So yeah, if I run through the presentation with you now, and then I would be happy to answer some questions about anything at the end of that, if that works for everybody.
Yeah, it does.
Great. So just starting off with a bit of context for you, for those that aren't aware, Te Kere Rukuruku is a Māori naming program. We're aimed to facilitate the return of te reo Māori to the whenua through the adoption of both contemporary and ancestral Māori names. The program was endorsed back in 2018 originally by what was called then the Environment and Community Committee, and a workshop has been recently held to try and progress that. It was obviously quite some time ago, not much has happened, so we had a workshop in August this year just to progress that intent and discuss some specific parks for going forward for naming. So at that workshop, we talked about 8 sites that are listed there: Ambury, Duda, Glenfern, Long Bay, Omana, Scandret, Shakespeare and Wenderholme regional parks. Let me just flip over here. So the key points that we have covered in the report is there's quite a bit of detail on the multiple plans and policies that we are working under and the outcomes that we are delivering on. We have clarified the preference from the PACE committee at the workshop for dual naming to occur rather than sole naming, and that has also feedback has come through quite clearly from the stakeholders that we've contacted over the last 2 months. We've also talked about the intent to adopt the dual Maori names, which can be socialised through the upcoming Regional Parks Draft Management Plan process to ensure good visibility of that, and that everyone's aware of the intent of the committee and the continuation of this policy. The names, when submitted by iwi, are not open to public debate or consultation, and we've also been advised that there is a legal obligation for council to retain the name Scandrett Regional Park, and we'll talk a bit more about that later in a following slide. So just to summarise the feedback that we have received since the workshop in August, the Regional Parks team led the consultation, and they contacted their stakeholder groups. There were 15 external groups that were contacted altogether, and that included the families connected with the park, so the Duda family and the Scandrett family. Information was supplied to all 21 local boards, and no objections. When we were at the time of writing the report, we had received no objections to dual naming. We do have a bit of an update on that now, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. There were, however, some requests for the English name to precede the Maori name from the Scandrett family, from the Duda family, and from the Torbay Historical Society. This is not in alignment with council policy. Council policy is quite clear. The convention is that the Maori comes before the English. So just to give you a bit of an update since of the last few days, we have had further discussions and communications with both the Duda and the Scandrett families. The initial support of dual naming by the Scandrett family does not seem to be consistently supported throughout the entire family. There are some members that feel the Scandrett name should remain as a sole English name on that site. So we will be talking to the Scandrett family further about that, and obviously we've already identified time was required to have those discussions in the report initially. And the Duda family also has a strong preference for the English to come before the Maori name. Again, this is not consistent with council policy and not something that we are wanting to support, but we would like a bit more time to talk to the Duda family about this, to discuss the impacts, get them a better understanding of what we're doing, what we're trying to achieve. Change can sometimes be a bit difficult, particularly when you may not be fully understanding of the benefits of what potentially we're trying to achieve. So some extra time would be great, and we'd be really comfortable with talking with the Duda family more about that. They have also raised the possibility that there is a potential legal obligation between council and the family for the retention of the name Duda Regional Park. We currently have no evidence of that. In fact, the evidence that we have is quite the contrary of that. Unfortunately, at the moment, under COVID conditions, we are unable to get into the archives to do any additional searches, and we've asked the family to supply that information. That hasn't been forthcoming as yet, so we will hopefully get to the bottom of that shortly. So that was the updated information for you, and the reason behind our request for a little bit more time to talk with the families in regards to the naming of Duda Regional Park. So the revised recommendations are that the committee should invite mana whenua to dual name 5 regional parks and to rename Omana Regional Park, so there would be 6 in total. All dual naming should be consistent with council policy, meaning the Maori comes first, the English comes second, and further discussion should occur between council, mana whenua and the Scandrett and Duda families in relation to the dual naming of those 2 parks. We also recommend information being made available to the public regarding this intent to dual name through the draft management plan process. So the next steps would be obviously the resolution today for the committee to invite mana whenua to provide those Maori names. council officers will undertake further engagement with both the Scandrett and the Duda families, with a view to putting those parks forward in a subsequent tranche. Iwi will then be able to discuss and agree who will be naming the sites individually, and they will go and do their research and submit the names for adoption. And that's the end of the presentation. We would be more than happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Ka pai, Dawn. Ngā mihi ki a koe, and Anehira, I don't know if there's anything you wish to say before I open up for pātai.
Kia ora matua. No, I'm quite happy to support the presentation and to open for questions.
Ka pai. So look, before I open it up, and I've got a list, again, the changes are there to give time for our staff to talk with both the Scandrett and Duda families in regards to this. I know that there have been issues going back to the Manukau days when I was there in 2003 around a possible name. I've spoken to Councillor Cashmore in regards to that particular issue as well. Just wanted to inform him of the changes to the recommendations that were sent out by Maya. So look, it's just giving them time, which is definitely what we need to do, based on the information received, especially in regards to the Duda Regional Park and the assertion by the family around legal obligations. So Councillor Fletcher, Walker, and then Watson.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I acknowledge the work that has been undertaken by officers on this. And I think I'd like my question to be understood in the context of, regional parks are one of the best things about Auckland. And I think where some of the sensitivity is around transitional issues, but all the more reason that we need to treat carefully with whānau and others. But I might add, we do need champions, and my question is, why is it that we haven't availed ourselves in consultation with the Friends of Regional Park? We've got people like Kid Howden and Bronwyn Turner offside, and also myself, in terms of being the portfolio councillor for parks. I was disappointed not to be able to just have a quick scan of this before it actually came to the committee. But with regards to the Friends of Regional Parks, what was the rationale? I totally understand you consulting with whānau. I totally understand you consulting with local boards, but why not those who have been very good at supporting us in the past? And can I say that I actually support the recommendations today, but I just think we don't want to alienate people.
Thank you, Councillor Christine. I totally support your position, and we think it's definitely advantageous to involve all the groups in this journey, and we certainly intend to involve them all and keep them well informed of what's going on. I will hand over to Scott De Silva from Regional Parks to more fully answer your question in regards to the Friends group, as they have obviously the previous relationships and engagement processes already in place with these groups. So Scott, if you're able to step in here and provide a bit more information for Councillor Fletcher, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn, and kia ora to the committee and through the chair. Look, there has been a bit of a slip in terms of engaging with the Friends of Regional Parks. That was not intentional. It was more of an oversight of anything. We received an email last night from Kid Howden sort of raising the fact at a meeting they had last night as the the Friends of Regional Parks Committee were meeting, and they were aware of it, and it came through an email this morning. And when I saw that, I realised that there'd been a gap in the communication with the Friends. I have since had a conversation this morning with Bronwyn Turner, the chair of the Friends of Regional Parks, and have provided her with a bit of an overview of the program, and she's willing and interested in actually catching up and having a bit more of a talk around the intent of the program. She didn't oppose it, but I haven't actually formally asked her for her view on that until we can sit down and work through that. So that's something that's on me that I will need to undertake in the next week or so.
Thank you, Scott. And I mean, look, we all make mistakes, and it appears to be an unintentional. If there's a slight been taken, it's just an oversight. So I'm happy to put my hand up to meet with her, with you, or with Kit Howden. The last thing I want to do on something that's such a jewel for the council, I really want to see us coming together in unity and not seeing us polarised on matters. So happy to help in any way.
Oh, that's great, Councillor Fletcher, and I'll take you up on your offer. I'd be more than happy for us to go and catch up with Bronwyn and talk this through.
Happy to do so. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Scott, I hope you got my email and my response to Kit's email.
Yes, I did, Councillor Fletcher, Filipano. So yeah, I've got the response. Thank you very much for that.
That's all right. So I mean, look, if they want to talk to the chair, sweet. If not, you can have your corridor with Councillor Fletcher. Kapai.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Walker, then Watson.
Sure. So I'd really like to just endorse the comments that Councillor Fletcher made around Friends of Regional Parks. I have some ongoing liaison with them, and I think they form a very important role. The other question I've got just goes to sensitivity. I used to converse with Jim Holdaway and a number of others who formed the ARA and helped to put some of the regional parks in place, and certainly I'm aware of the history of some of the acquisitions, particularly around the Shakespeare Regional Park acquisition, which was not really handled very well as far as the Shakespeare family was concerned, and I knew Werner Shakespeare, for example. So my question is around also engagement with the Shakespeare family, who I'm sure would be interested in engagement. That would need to be handled sensitively. And I have another question, just as it goes to the iwi history of the areas. For example, if we look at Shakespeare Park, that was associated with Te Kauwharau, who were associated with Ngāti Kahu and Ngāti Rongo and so on. And their history, lineage and occupancy of the area went back to the very beginnings. So my particular concern around the naming is just around the sensitivity as to how that is handled with iwi, particularly those iwi that had the pa. There were 5 pa, for example, at Shakespeare that Te Kauwharau were involved with. So I've just got a question around that process, Mr. Chair. One, as it goes to how we're dealing with families that have been involved, particularly the Shakespeare family in addition, and also the process of how we deal with the naming as it goes to iwi. Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, kia ora for that, Councillor Walker. So there were some comments mixed with pātai. So I'm assuming that you won't have any comments later on. But
necessarily, Mr. Chair.
Hold on, Dawn, can you speak to the questions that were posed, please?
Yes. Te Kiri Rukuruku has been working with mana whenua for, probably about 4 or 5 years now, working through the process of naming and coming up with a program that they are happy with. So we're quite confident that our process is quite robust and well supported by mana whenua. Just to touch briefly and talk you through how that will work. I have, mana whenua are already aware, we have a regular 2-monthly meeting with all mana whenua across Tamaki Makaurau. They are aware that we're coming to the PACE committee today to discuss the inclusion of regional parks into the program, and they're looking forward to that. Some of them already have indicated an interest in naming some of those sites, and we will be working with all mana whenua to identify who has the interest, and then we will work within that subset group to work out how that's going to work together. And we will not be moving forward on this journey until mana whenua are happy with how that's going to work and who is going to be naming and how that's going to be taken forward. So we work really, really closely with them. It is very much a mana whenua-led process, and until we get that agreement and support for going forward, we will be talking with mana whenua until that happens. Does that help to clarify that, Councillor Watson, for you?
It helps somewhat. I would have thought in terms of the criteria that we'd be looking at the deep history of some of these locations, their significance to the people that occupied them, who in some respects are largely landless, some of them today, and their relationship with these areas is particularly important because it goes to the very real history of the area, not the latter day history. That's certainly something that I'm acutely aware of. Yes, by all means leave it to mana whenua, but I have a real concern around the naming as it goes to the original occupation and so on. So I don't know what you can tell me about that.
Yes, well through the chair, mana whenua have obviously a huge and vast knowledge, especially the kaumātua in some of these iwi, around the deep history and the background behind these sites. They really are the people that have the greatest matauranga and knowledge of what has taken place on the whenua and the myriad of layers of different iwi and what's been going on for hundreds of years, and they've got this huge wealth of knowledge, and that's why we really do defer to them in these instances. And that knowledge, they will spend a lot of time with the kaumātua, and I'm really actually looking forward to learning a lot about some of these sites, because I think we will. I think this is going to come out as part of this process, and it's going to be a fantastic thing to be able to add that to the parks and be able to make that information available for the local communities and the families that have come after.
Thanks, Dawn. Councillor Watson.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay there, Ralph?
Yep, kapai.
Yeah, the one question that wasn't answered there was in respect of Shakespeare Regional Park. You talk about engagement with key stakeholders. There has been no engagement with, according to the item before us, with the Shakespeare family. And as Councillor Walker said, if you're aware of the history of Shakespeare Regional Park, it was an aggressive acquisition. So the Shakespeare family, before World War II, they lost half their farm, which was taken for a military base for the instalment of big guns over the Tiri Channel. And then in the 1960s, the ARA as it was then, took their farm under their aggressive acquisition policy for regional parks. So I would have, so why haven't that family been contacted? Vivian Shakespeare was certainly, the daughter was certainly around, a decade ago. Is there a particular reason for that?
Scott, can you, to partly answer your question, Councillor Watson, we would be more than happy to talk to the Shakespeare family, and it would be great to get contact details. I'm not aware of, I don't have any contact details for the moment. I'm just going to check in with Scott here to step in. He may have some more information on that, but more than happy to take them on this journey and talk to them about what we're doing and how we're doing it and involve them in the process. Absolutely. Scott, are you able to confirm whether or not you have those contact details for the Shakespeare family?
Through the chair, I'd need to have a look, Dawn. I haven't got that information with me at this stage, but more than happy to follow that up in regards to any members of the Shakespeare family who are around. So.
Okay, well that's great, Scott. The last time, and it was over 10 years ago, Vivian Shakespeare lived out Wainui way somewhere, but may have moved. So that would be good, because, as I said, it was quite a well, it was a very unpleasant experience that scarred the family, certainly, but it's a wonderful regional park that we've got today, as everyone knows. So that would be highly desirable. In terms of another group, equally important, certainly in terms of Long Bay Regional Park and also Shakespeare Regional Park, is Ngāti Kahu. Does anyone at this time have any information on the status of Ngāti Kahu? Because they're identified in the item as the key iwi here. That they were certainly decimated in the early 1800s. It saw them leave Whangaprawa Peninsula in effect. Has anyone got any information as to what the status of Ngāti Kahu is today? There's 2 regional parks they're involved in.
No, through the chair, no. I don't have information in my fingertips to be able to answer that question, I'm sorry. Unless, Anahira, do you have any knowledge about Ngāti Kahu?
No, through the chair, I don't either, but I do know that we will need to include them in this conversation if we are to move forward.
Okay, great. Just 2 quick ones, if I may, Mr. Chair. In terms of information, and you mentioned the great, wealth of knowledge that exists within the iwi themselves, you'll be aware, of course, that under the ARC, Graham Murdoch, as the head of heritage, did extensive research during ARC times with iwi himself. That has quite a rich history of a number of all the major regional parks that were acquired in those 1960s anyway. Do we have that resource available to us as well to aid this process?
Yes, through the chair, yes, we do. We work with Graham on a number of projects, and he's got some fantastic information on that. In fact, some of it we've already referred to. I think he wrote a book with a whole lot of history about the
Dreamers of the Day.
Dreamers of the Day.
That's right. Yeah, I've actually read through that already and pulled out quite a bit of information from that. Some of it's included in the attachment to the report that you'll see. Yeah. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, well, that's great. He also did individual pieces over and above that on regional parks like Shakespeare and Wenderholm too, that will probably be useful. Final question, Mr. Chair, and it goes to this convention, apparent convention, the Council of the Maori name coming first or coming before the English. Is there any pragmatic considerations at this time given to how that dual naming can appear in a form that is equally striking or visible with both names? And I'm thinking, if we're looking to carry everyone along with this, is there some pragmatic way? I'm assuming details of lettering or visual appearance of any signage is going to take into account the desirability of capturing both names, if just for the pragmatic of notion of people knowing where they've arrived. So for instance, if we talk about Shakespeare, it's actually divided into three areas. It's Army Bay, it's Akoromai, it's Te Harahi. and sure, people might be going to Shakespeare, but they're actually going to one of those different parts of it. So has any initial thoughts been given as to the appearance of that signage that's going to make both English and Maori equally visible?
We don't have the detail on the signage as yet. Obviously, we don't. We're one step at a time. But I can certainly provide assurances that the signage that's been done previously, that the English name is very clear. I could send you through some examples of what we've used in local parks if you're interested. I'd be happy to give you some examples of that. And yeah, obviously wayfinding is very important within these massive parks, and we would can quite confidently say that there wouldn't be any confusion. That will be very clear where you're going. The English will still be quite prominent. The Maori does come first, but in the local park signage, it's in a different colour. So it's still very, very clear where you are. And if you don't understand or initially understand that the park has changed its name, the English is still quite clearly visible. And
yeah. Okay, well, I'm assuming it's retaining both its names. It's not changing name. We don't want to end up like the Irish with the Gaelic, where the Irish themselves, the non-Gaelic speakers, don't know where they are because the Gaelic is so different.
We definitely don't want to end up like that. No.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Look, thanks, Councillor Watson, and I as well, the two previous councillors. Look, what's been identified before I move on, there's still 3 who have pātai, but I think a gap's been identified, and I've seen the gap and didn't know it was there. I would normally run through a gap, but this particular one has been identified in regards to consultation. Well, not consultation, but at least engaging with the families concerned. So, Dawn, I'm assuming that has been now picked up by yourself and Scott and the team in regards to the first 3 members of the committee.
Yes, it most certainly has, Mr. Chair, and that's absolutely no problem. We're more than happy to do it. Or if there's any other groups that anyone thinks of that we haven't spoken to, we've clearly included that list in the report. We'd be more than happy to get that information and to ensure that they are included in the process and have some robust discussions and information provided.
Yeah, that'll be great, because at least that is crucial for us to take anybody along with this journey that we're currently on. So thank you, Dawn, and the rest. I'll move now, and look, for those that are not speaking, can you please put your microphones on mute, only because we're hearing background. Councillor Matuakake, Tony.
Tēnā koe, Alf, tēnā koe, Dawn. I just wanted to come in and say, my question is really around the wording in the recommendation. If it, and I support the whole notion of providing more time to engage and to get the right people involved in the kōrero and in the discussion. But I've seen so many times where we have recommendations where we invite mana whenua, we invite people to have input. But really, this I think when it comes to naming, especially if we're wanting to establish legacy names for a particular area, that it should move from invite to actually just take out invite. We don't progress until such time as they have provided substantial feedback. Is my question. So can that change, Chair? Can that change in terms of, rather than just inviting, that we be more affirmative in that? This shouldn't go on unless we have the Duda family feedback. This shouldn't go on unless we've had various parties' feedback, including mana whenua, as opposed to invite.
Yeah, look, that is what I think has been made clear now in regards to the 3 previous, the 3 councillors that previously spoke to you, Matua. So look, that's been made clear, that the engagement with those to take us on the journey is important, and also around the invite that this is what's going to happen. So I think that's been taken on board. Dawn, any comments?
No, I guess the invite is a word we have used consistently throughout the program. We're happy to review that and change that to something that's a bit more strongly worded if that's the committee's preference.
Well, it's my preference through the chair. It's my preference because we've seen a lot of consultation in the past where they're invited, but they don't actually invite when it comes to names and historical significance through a name, through a reenactment of an event, or it's important that if this takes us another 12 months, so be it. It shouldn't be just invite, but then because of time we've run out of time, and we're going to make a rash decision. These are too important, and when I get to year 2040, I want to be looking back and say, yep, we consulted well, and this is the history, this is the legacy.
Yeah, look, I'm going to, after this anyway, have a corridor with the team and just to take on the points that we had. So, look, there's no issue with that, and we'll come back to you personally in regards to that, Matua. Move on to Councillor Kuhn.
Tēnā koe e te hia mana, Alf, e mihi ana ki a koutou. Thank you for the presentation, and tēnā korua Anahera and Dawn, and tēnā koutou, including Scott too. Thank you for this, and I have two pārtai, if I may, Mr. Chair. The first one is just about how we talk about this process, and in the Māori Outcomes Report, page 31 of that report, it talks about Te Kiti Rukuruku, and this is at page 135 of the agenda, and it talks about the naming being about, not naming, but actually it's a restoration or a return, and it's a restoration of mana and Māori. It doesn't even use the verb to name or to rename. So I was just curious in terms of how that's reflected in this report, and that understanding that this is far more than a naming process.
Kia ora, good pārtai.
Kia ora, mātua.
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor Kuhn. That's a very good point, and perhaps I should have made that a bit clearer in my report, because that's quite correct. It is about restoring the stories and the narratives, the ancestral names. Not always we get a combination, and that's something that comes out through our discussions with mana whenua and through their knowledge and their the histories that they're aware of and that their kaumātua are aware of. They do sometimes adopt a more contemporary name, and that's could be for a multitude of reasons. And I probably could have gone into that a bit more detail in the report. I guess it was quite a massive report as it was, so I was trying not to overload people with too much information, is probably part of the reason. But you are quite correct, and thank you so much for raising that here, because it is about so much more than just a name.
Kia ora, Dawn, appreciate that, and it was nice to see Anahera's comment too in the Māori Outcomes Report on Te Kiti Rukuruku and the importance of the program. My second pārtai, if I may, Mr. Chair, and I just have to kind of do a little kind of intro to this question to make sense of it. But when I was on the local board and we did a restoration of a name at Western Park, Tuna Mo, which is the original name of the stream that runs through Western Park, which is one of Auckland's oldest parks, I understand. There was a lot of jostling over which name came first, and which I can see is kind of coming through in this report, and the concerns particularly were their family names. But what was and in the end, unfortunately, in my view, it ended up being named Western Park Tuna Mo, because of that. I think at the time the members of the local board just, it was kind of a letting go that they couldn't quite, they were struggling with in terms of the mana of the name. But what was a light bulb moment after the naming had been done, from the chair at the time who had really pushed for the Pākehā name to go first, was actually linguistically it doesn't really make sense from, if you're speaking English, to say Western Park Tūna Mo, because it should, you really need to have then the noun in te reo as well. So if, for example, I don't know which would be the preferred te reo name, say for parks, but say it's Paka or Paparehia, you would then be saying Western Park Tūna Mo Paka, so sort of saying park, whereas it actually makes much more sense and flows as Tūna Mo Western Park, because then you don't have to say park twice. And I know this is a completely different reason for all the reasons of mana whenua and from a Māori perspective of the naming and what we're doing in this process of restoration and returning, but I think there's also an explanation from a te reo English perspective that we are, that it's like maybe there's some advice or that we could ask for around how it just makes more sense from a naming perspective, from a Pākehā perspective perhaps, to actually put the te reo Māori name first. So I hope that question, that's just kind of an offering of one of this process where this happened around, you know, what should go first. Actually, if we were going to do it again now, I think the local board, even regardless of the council's policy, which I think is right, would actually land in a different place by just seeing it as a logical language way to do it. So thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence on that question.
No, that's all right. Because, sorry, Dawn, I just wanted to let everybody know that we're not obviously going to relitigate the policy. The policy's in place, and Māori is first, and then the European name. It's more around getting this particular item through. We had the workshops and also the committee in 2018 around this. So for me, at the moment, the policy is that it is going to be the Māori name, and then the English or Pākehā name. So look, Dawn, I don't know if you've got anything to add, but for me is to look at the recommendations in front of us now.
Can I just clarify, sorry, Mr. Chair, the question, just to really make it clear on the question, I just think in those conversations with the families who might be resisting the council's policy, my question is there perhaps some assistance around just how the language works best in this approach?
Yes, through the chair, we can answer that if you like, Mr. Chair.
Go, Dawn.
Yeah. I totally endorse everything you've just said there, Pippa, and I think that it's a really good additional point that we will be making with the families. The reo, does stand alone. It doesn't have a descriptor. It's not something that, and Anahira is could probably speak to this. I might pass the rākau over to her briefly because she's got a very good way of outlining that as well. Anahira?
Kia ora, Dawn. Tēnā tātou. I think, and we will definitely support all of those. We do support all of those points, Councillor Coons, and thank you for your comments and your tautoko. And there will be additional conversations around the nuances of te reo Māori, but also the fact is that the dual names honour both of those names, and neither of those names will be a translation of each other. So Ambery would still stay on the park, and whatever the name is that the iwi bring back to that park is really bringing back the narrative and the nuance of that whakapapa to that park to sit in the same space as the Pākehā name as well.
Thank you, appreciated, and a descriptor was the word I was looking for park.
Yes.
So thank you. Struggling with my language. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't need to comment further other than just to confirm my endorsement of Te Kite Ruku Ruku program and this process. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora.
Ka pai. Matua Glenn, and then Councillor Bartley, and then it'll be whakaro after that, and our staff would not be answering once we get into the comments. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair, and through you, e mihi ana kia koutou e kawe mai ana I te kaupapa nei. When we do this tono atu ki ngā mana whenua, ki ngā iwi o Tāmaki, I'm just wondering why we're not asking them to provide kōrero for these two other names instead of saying, oh, we'll have another hui for this one. Because it just kind of makes me think, oh, not another one. That's the first discussion. And then with the proviso that, that there has to be some kōrero, as opposed to saying, we'll have another kōrero later, and then that kōrero may happen maybe 10, 15 years later. And it's amazing that gets lost in 15 years. And so that's my first question. I've got 3 questions in total, Chair.
Ka pai, Councillor Wilcox.
Glenn.
Glenn, I can answer that through the chair. We feel that we've got 6 parks going forward for naming in the first tranche. That is quite a good number, particularly with available resource for iwi who are doing quite a lot of naming across the isthmus at the moment. We'd also really like to not put anyone in a position of conflict and really have these names welcomed and honoured and understood and appreciated in the way that they should be. So a little bit more time to talk to these families may make a big difference in having that more positive experience for everyone, for mana whenua and for the families and for the community. So that's what we're hoping for, and we certainly have no intention of this taking 15 years. We would be looking at starting the second tranche as soon as we finish the first tranche. So that's what we do with the local boards, and that's definitely what we would be intending to do with the regional parks.
So, sorry, I'm going to supplement this little question. Then why are we not giving mana whenua the chance to have a kōrero directly to these whānau?
I can answer that one, Dawn. Kia ora matua, it's Anahira here. The process in the past with all of our parks naming has been that the council holds the management of these parks and the decision making around these parks. That sits firmly within the council, and our PACE committee is that forum in this space, and we don't ask mana whenua to name these names until this has been passed through this process first. We definitely have their opinions and their wawata for this, but they are not formally invited, asked, resolved to name these parks until the council has decided that is what will go forward.
Ka tae rātou te kōrero atu ki ngā whānau?
Kai a rātou tēnā mena ka hia.
I te mea I hakaro ana kei a te kaunihera te kōrero katoa. Anyhow, so look, sorry, councillors, what I was asking is there any reason why mana whenua can't go and talk directly with these whānau? And if the council were asked that, would they allow that? I mean, I'm just a bit concerned. It's becoming a council process, but actually this is meant to be a Māori outcome and an outcome also for the national community.
So can I just add this, is that the only reason that there's 2 of them, because there are legal obligations that this is what happens when the land was put into a regional park, and that's the only reason why we've given this time now. One is for there's an existing legal obligation in regards to Scandrett, but the Duda, the whānau for Duda Regional Park have said, no, there is a legal condition with the contract we signed about who comes first. So that's why we're just giving them time to have that kōrero with them.
Yeah, okay then. Kabai, you've answered that question. I think it's a legal issue, and I'm fine with that. Number 2 question regards, in here you've said there's no real cost to council, but is not the tikanga of naming and whakahoki te ingoa, is not the tikanga also involved that the regional park then has to sign up for bilingual signage as it replaces it and puts in new signage? And is that a cost that needs to be factored in? Or have we already done this?
Yes, through the chair. There is a cost. Mana whenua obviously reimbursed for their time, and that has been allowed for from the regional parks operational budget, which Scott can provide more information on if you need it. Regarding the signage is generally upgraded, and the names are renewed as the signage is required for upgrade. So we try to minimise any financial implications for the signage by doing it when it's needing to be renewed. However, there is likely to be some signage that may need to be upgraded a bit sooner, and in those cases we keep the costs to the absolute minimum by reskinning those signs and not by replacing the whole sign, and that has been factored into the budgets.
Sorry, Chair. So to understand that we're going to kind of like we did when we became Auckland Council, we just put our little stickers over the Franklin or Rodney district thing. Is that's what we're talking about here?
Yeah, it's most of the signs have like a laminate layer that you can overlay. So we'd probably overlay the entire sign rather than just put a sticker over it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Look, I'm going to say totally support the kaupapa, Chair. That's my comment, and we'll leave it at that.
Kia ora matua.
Kapai. Councillor Bartley, I think you're the last in regards to the apartheid, then I'm going to move into whakaaro. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you. Thank you for this report. I just wanted to know what would happen if we just went ahead and named the parks Māori names. Like, what would happen? Considering that is what this whole program, considering that we're in Aotearoa, Māori name, what if we just went ahead with the Māori names? What would happen? Would those families get their parks back? What's the story?
Is that a question for us, Kia ora?
No, look, Councillor Bartley, I know what would happen. One would be going against the Kite Rukuruku, our policy in regards to dual naming, that's one. And I think as a result of the pātai and the kōrero that we're having now, it's important that we make sure that people are on the journey. But te kite rukuruku, when we discussed it in 2018 at the Environment and Community Committee, was around dual naming. That's why Mana Whenua came on board and said, yep, with all their discussion, that this is where we need to head.
Wow, okay. Thank you.
Okay then. Just moving to whakaaro, got Councillor Cooper, then Fletcher.
Getting there, sorry. I guess for me, as a Pākehā boomer, I'm old enough to remember when I went to school under the Maunga Poketa Papa, and when it was Mount Roskill. And if you look at, we always used to call Mount Egmont, but now we all call it Taranaki. And I think this is a journey, as a lot of people have been saying here. This is a journey, but it's also about manaakitanga, and that's about looking after each other, but it's also about upholding mana. And if you think about that, that's why this has to be, we have to go hand in hand with the families that had their names attached to this park. We need for everybody to be able to hold up their head high and go, this is part of my history, for Māori, for the iwi, but also for the Pākehā families that were on those places too. And I think that's why I really like this process. It's about upholding everyone's mana, but also the journey of us all learning. You know, as we've grown, probably Alf and I are similar vintage, and he would have grown up in it with a very different worldview from me. But what I've really enjoyed about this process is the whole Te Kite Rukuruku program is that even in Mairohe, I'm starting to see different names. I'm starting to understand more of the history. And I live on Kopu Paka Kaianga, which is called Luckin's Point now. But, you know, now I understand that it was Te Kaurau, you know, and those sorts of things give a richness for all of us. But they also, as Matua Tony says, you know, they help to heal. You know, they help us all to understand one another. And I think that's why it's important to keep having these conversations with the families, and but also welcome this, because over time, for the people that think we should just get on with it and just have one name, you know, this is a learning process. So, and I don't think anyone's going to get lost, because, you know, we've got Google now, Google Maps. But I think that the really fantastic thing that I've seen over the decades is really just being able to embrace te reo. You know, as we learn, we see our own children growing up with it in school. It's just more it's second nature to them, or first. It's just about, you know, we're never too old to learn, and I really welcome this. I think it's quite a celebration, really. There's nothing to be afraid of. I think it's great to learn, and it's great to understand. So I really absolutely support the work of the team and all the iwi and the families of these places that are involved. Kia ora.
Ngā mihi. And before I go to Councillor Fletcher, just wanted to advise the staff that now that we're into our whakaaro comments, that there'll be no need for our staff to answer anything. We're just going to get into this, and then the recommendation will be put. Councillor Fletcher, Henderson, and then Walker.
Kia ora, and I'm pleased to follow Councillor Cooper, because the themes that she spoke of, the journey that we're on, and the respect that I think that we must show for one another, it's very appropriate. We're discussing this on Armistice Day, really, or Veterans Day, or it's a special day because it's a moment in time when we stand and we reflect. And for me, it's in many ways our regional parks are telling the story of Tamaki, of Auckland, and that has been touched on in part. I was going to talk to the role that we have in telling these stories around the restoration of historic and heritage restoration, as well as ecological restoration, but we don't have the opportunity to do that unless we're willing to step back and ensure that in talking to all of the parties, from mana whenua, but also to Matawaka, to the Pākehā families, and one always assumes that within the Pākehā families there was unity. Knowing some of the personalities of the farms that became part of the regional parks, they all had their own stories and history as well, and probably there wasn't always unity within those whānau. I just think that this is a very special opportunity to heal in lots of ways, and to recognise that these places, which are so important to our soul, particularly during the time of COVID, how many people just raced to get to a regional park when they were permitted to, because of the restoration that that it provides the soul. And that might sound a little bit soft, but I think all of us need that. And we also need to look at just how much we have had to battle for these places. It wasn't so many years ago that there were people who would have had the regional park sold. That they, there was, if you go back and you read that book, Dreamers of the Day, not just the acquisition in recent times of these parks, but the very real likelihood of losing them. So this is our moment in time in terms of, for us as an amalgamated council, to actually pause and say, yes, we have this policy, and yes, we're going, but we want to take people with us. So we need to do that with a focus on the visitor experience now, but also for that of the future, and giving us that sense of tūranga waiwai for many of us. And I just think this is important. It's not something to be rushed, and it's something that needs to be inclusive. So in mandating our officers today, I hope that they have taken on board the views of some of us, at any rate, of going and genuinely engaging with as many as possible to make sure that this has the integrity that it should. But I commend the officers who've worked on it. I acknowledge perhaps there've been one or two unintentional oversights, but that doesn't deter us from moving forward respectfully and really doing justice to this wonderful legacy that we have and carry the stewardship for.
Kapai. Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Henderson, followed by Councillor Walker, and then I will close if there's no further.
Kia ora. Yeah, just really quickly, I wanted to briefly provide kind of a helicopter view and support the work that we're doing here. It is good to kind of look into some of the detail around the discussions that are being had with various families and so forth, but we need to really just remember why we're doing this and remember why it's so important and such a good and positive thing for our city to do. And it does feel great to be part of that process. I was doing a little bit of research in preparation for this and looking at sort of things that other countries do, that actually we're far behind this kind of kaupapa. When you look at places like Wales, which has a bilingual signage policy, which has policies that were passed several years ago for 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050, protecting there, they're all a lot better than some of the wider population are. And, you know, we've got to really do this kind of work and then some. And I'm really proud of kind of the work in this and the Te Te Rukuruku program. It's something that nationally we need to be looking at this kind of stuff and doing a lot more. So, kia ora, thanks.
Kapai, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Walker.
Sure. Just got a quick comment, Mr. Chair. I think that we've taken on board the necessity to follow through this exercise with iwi and also the settler families who had an association with these areas for and I take on board the comments that Dawn made. I would make a request that we have some transparency around the process that goes to naming. And as Dawn mentioned, there's an opportunity to glean history around some of these areas. Though having said that, I'm just mindful that the history of some of these areas goes way back and certainly isn't in any form of living memory that I doubt exists. That's certainly my understanding of the history of the ancient past sites of the Whangapara Peninsula. And it may well be that the likes of Graham Murdoch and others, including some of the descendants of the settler families, have got a lot to add. I would hope that in the naming of these areas, as Councillor Watson mentioned, they've almost got sub-identities, particularly as it goes to past sites and the like. So I'll be really hopeful that some of that history is reflected in the naming, because that is the real sense of identity with these places, rather than a more later name that might not bear much historical resemblance to the area, Mr. Chair. So hopefully we're picking up on those things and encourage that there will be some engagement with the Shakespeare family. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Look, just to close the debate, because I've got no other comments or people who wish to speak, just to close the debate, and I won't be repeating anything that has been said, but Dawn, I want to acknowledge you and the staff in regards to this particular item. I know that we were talking late last night around this and after you got that information, so thank you so much. Councillor Fletcher's mentioned some oversights and I totally agree with her. I know you've taken those on board, but we will have a kōrero post this particular meeting in regards to how we manoeuvre ourselves around Te Kite Rukuruku, etc., and the naming. But look, just want to acknowledge you, Dawn, Anahira, Justine, and the team in regard to the Scott, and also our regional parks team. So look, thank you so much, and I will put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 Against? Carried. As I said, about 1 o'clock is the break, but